Thursday afternoon arrived with an indifferent quality, suspended between something and nothing. Above, clouds stretched in muted shades, the sort that inspire wrapping yourself in warmth and brewing tea simply because. My husband Tom was traveling for work, leaving our home wrapped in an unusual stillness that seemed to amplify every small sound. I was organizing clothes in the main room when the chime sounded. The unexpected noise caught me off guard. Visitors without warning had become rare in our lives. Beyond the textured glass, a tall figure appeared. Briefly, I paused, assuming perhaps a package had arrived. But opening the door revealed no stranger. Mark stood before me, Tom's longtime companion. His expression held that characteristic uneven grin, the one that once filled our home with warmth during evenings when they'd reminisce about their university days. Nearly 5 years had passed since our last encounter. Time had altered his appearance, matured him, though with elegance. His hair had grown sparser, touched with silver near the sides, and something deeper rested in his gaze, as though life had taught him lessons he'd quietly absorbed. "Hello, Sarah," his voice came gently. "I'm hoping I haven't arrived at an inconvenient moment." Words momentarily escaped me. Then warmth spread through my chest and I moved back. "Mark, how wonderful. Please enter." His steps were measured as he crossed the threshold, eyes sweeping the space as if each corner held fragments of the past. The atmosphere felt textured, easy yet deliberate. I prepared coffee and we settled at the kitchen table, where afternoon light formed bright patterns on the surface. Our conversation began with surface matters, his career developments, Tom's situation, the curious acceleration of time itself. Yet beneath these conventional exchanges, something remained unvoiced, resting quietly between our sentences. His attention found mine repeatedly, holding a fraction longer than circumstance required. It wasn't desire, not in the expected sense. Something more profound existed there, a recognition that reached places in me long neglected. I shared how emptiness had settled into the house lately, how Tom's professional life had consumed him entirely, and how I sometimes longed for the man he'd been before. Mark absorbed my words without interruption, fingers circling his cup, expression unwavering and compassionate. "Your strength has always been remarkable," he offered after consideration. "But acknowledging loneliness isn't weakness, Sarah." The manner of his speaking dissolved barriers I hadn't consciously constructed. A small laugh escaped me, a tempting deflection, yet my voice wavered partway. He extended his arm across the table, not grasping my hand, but near enough that his presence felt tangible. We remained there extensively, words unnecessary. Beyond the walls, air moved through branches, creating soft sounds against the glass. Reality seemed to contract to that single space. Two individuals, shared years, and countless things hovering unsaid in the atmosphere. When he eventually rose to depart, something shifted between us once more. His smile emerged, tender, comforting. "Mention to Tom that I visited," he said. Then uncertainty crossed his features. "And look after yourself, yes?" I acknowledged with a nod, trusting my voice seemed unwise. As the door sealed behind him, I remained motionless for some time, observing the vacant area he had occupied. How peculiar that one unplanned encounter could awaken so much, memories long dormant, emotions buried, and questions I'd stopped asking myself years prior. That evening, settling into bed while rain began tapping against the windows, I couldn't release the image of his eyes. Though they had communicated little verbally, somehow they'd conveyed everything. The following morning carried a different quality. Rain had ceased, leaving the air dense and fragrant, the type that adheres to skin and persists after you've moved outdoors. I woke before scheduled, with that particular discomfort that accompanies remembering something you cannot easily dismiss. Tom contacted me around 9, his voice distorted through the connection. He discussed conferences, travel, and figures beyond my comprehension. I listened, responding appropriately when required, though part of my consciousness remained elsewhere. Mark's face persisted in my thoughts, the softening of his expression when I spoke, how silence with him had felt secure. This wasn't about physical pull. This concerned being truly perceived, and perhaps that understanding frightened me most. Following the conversation, I prepared breakfast. Simple toast and coffee, though it tasted more of obligation than nourishment. I carried my cup outside and observed the neighborhood stirring to life. Our elderly neighbors walked their dog past. Children on bicycles rushed by, their laughter trailing behind them. Existence continued its familiar rhythm, yet something within me had transformed. Near midday, my phone illuminated with a message. The number initially appeared unfamiliar, but recognition came upon opening it. I hope yesterday wasn't inappropriate. Seeing you was wonderful, Sarah. Mark. My finger lingered above the screen extensively. I composed and deleted my response numerous times before finally transmitting, "Seeing you was wonderful as well."
Nothing inappropriate occurred. That should have concluded it, but another message appeared. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee sometime? Just to reconnect properly. I studied those words far longer than appropriate. Nothing problematic existed in the suggestion, simply two old friends reestablishing connection. Yet, contemplating it created tension in my chest. Still, I typed my reply. Yes, I'd enjoy that. We arranged to meet the next day at a modest cafe near the lake, the variety of establishment where time seems suspended. He'd arrived first, positioned by the window, a book open yet clearly unread before him. He stood upon seeing me, that natural smile returning. "You look wonderful," he said, and momentarily breathing became difficult. We conversed for hours about existence, about how circumstances had developed so unexpectedly for both of us. He described his divorce, the emptiness that followed, and his ongoing search for acceptance. I explained my marriage, how it felt stable yet remote, more partnership than true connection. He listened the way few do currently, with complete focus, without interruption. Periodically, our eyes would connect and remain a moment too long, like two people attempting to understand something neither could precisely identify. The lake shimmered beyond the window, sunlight dancing on the surface. I recall thinking how magnificent it appeared and how unusual it felt to experience such vitality sitting across from someone other than my husband. Not precisely guilt, more awareness. When we departed, he accompanied me to my vehicle. We stood there, neither entirely prepared to leave. He spoke quietly. "You deserve to be truly seen, Sarah. Remember that." I wanted to question his meaning, but he was already stepping away, that subtle sadness touching his smile again. Driving home, I replayed his words continuously. They persisted like a melody I couldn't dismiss. That evening, sleep came sparingly. I kept considering how effortlessly he had understood me, how simply he had articulated what I'd been unable to admit to myself. This wasn't romance. This wasn't betrayal. Something quieter, more profound existed here, like a reflection revealing a part of myself I hadn't examined in years. And that's when understanding arrived. Sometimes the most unexpected individuals remind us who we truly are. The subsequent week drifted past in quiet mornings and restless evenings. Tom had returned from traveling, wearing that familiar exhaustion, the one stemming from extended hours and constant communications. He kissed my forehead upon arrival, inquired about things, and within moments was already absorbed in messages. This was our pattern, too familiar perhaps. I continued with routines, preparing meals, maintaining the house, pretending not to notice the expanding distance between us. But in the recesses of my mind, Mark's voice persisted. "You deserve to be truly seen." It resonated in quiet moments, the gaps in conversation, the way Tom's gaze drifted past mine when discussing work. Several days later, I found myself at the lake again. The visit wasn't planned. It was one of those afternoons when the house felt too confining, too saturated with everything unspoken. The water lay calm, sunlight flickering on its surface like scattered jewels. I sat on a bench, the same cafe visible down the path, and almost laughed when I saw him approaching. "Sarah," he said, his surprise softened by a smile. "I hadn't expected to encounter you here." I could express the same, though my heart had already accelerated. He settled beside me, close enough that warmth from his arm was perceptible, but not close enough for contact. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed quieter than usual. The distant sound of children playing, the faint hum of a boat motor across the water. "I've been contemplating what you said about being truly seen," I finally admitted. He looked at me carefully. "And I think I forgot what that signified." I said, "Somewhere along the way, I simply stopped requesting it." He nodded, his gaze steady on the lake. "It occurs to everyone. We dedicate so much of ourselves to our families, our partners, that we forget to verify if anything remains." Something about his words penetrated deeply. I turned to look at him, really observe him. His face held lines now, gentle ones at the corners of his eyes, but they made him appear kind, experienced. And his eyes still carried that same depth, the type that communicated without requiring words. "Do you ever wish circumstances had developed differently?" I asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but then I remember if they had, I might not be sitting here presently." There it appeared again, that stillness between us, thick with something unspoken, not longing precisely, but understanding. Two people who'd lived sufficient life to recognize the significance of connection when it manifested. He reached out then, slowly resting his hand atop mine. It wasn't bold or hasty, just a simple human touch, warm, anchoring. For a moment, I didn't move. The world around us seemed to pause. I thought of Tom, of our years together, of the love that had softened but never disappeared. And yet, in that instant, I also thought of myself, of the woman I used to be, the one who dreamed, who felt profoundly, who laughed without restraint. When I finally withdrew my hand, he didn't attempt to stop me. He simply nodded, as if he understood everything I couldn't bring myself to articulate.
"I should depart," I said, standing. "Sarah." His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "You don't need to apologize for wanting to feel alive." That evening, I sat on the porch long after darkness fell. The sky was deep blue, the air cool. Inside, I could hear Tom on the phone, his laughter distant, muffled through the walls. And I realized something. Mark hadn't entered my life to separate me from my marriage. He'd entered to remind me that I was still in it, that I still possessed choices, to speak, to ask, to reach out before the silence consumed me completely. As I closed my eyes, I made a quiet promise to myself, to stop disappearing into the background of my own existence. A week passed before I saw Mark again. Not because I was avoiding him, though perhaps in some way I was, but because I needed time to sit with everything that had awakened inside me. Life has a method of progressing forward, even when your heart is somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow. Tom had noticed a change in me. One evening, as we sat at dinner, he looked up from his plate and said, "You seem altered lately, quieter. Everything all right?" For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. The former version of me would have dismissed it, smiled, and claimed I was fine. But something in me had shifted, something that wouldn't permit me to hide behind simple answers anymore. "I'm uncertain," I said honestly. "I just feel like we've been existing beside each other instead of with each other." He frowned, taken aback. "You mean us?" "Yes," I said softly. "When was the last time we genuinely talked, Tom, about something that mattered?" He set his utensil down and leaned back, exhaling. "I suppose I didn't realize how far apart we've drifted." It wasn't a confrontation, more like an acknowledgement of a truth that had been waiting to be spoken. We sat in silence after that, both lost in thought. And in that silence, I didn't feel anger or blame, just sadness for the years that had slipped quietly between us. The next day, I drove to the lake one final time. The afternoon sun hung low, golden on the water. Mark was there, standing by the railing, hands in his pockets, like he'd been waiting for something he couldn't quite identify. When he saw me, he smiled, that gentle, knowing smile. "I wasn't certain you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I needed to." We stood there side by side, watching the ripples move across the lake. Neither of us spoke for a while. There was nothing left to explain, really. What had passed between us wasn't something to categorize. It was a moment of truth, the kind that leaves you transformed. "I talked to Tom," I finally said. "We're trying. I think we both forgot how to listen." He nodded, his eyes soft. "That's a positive thing, Sarah. He's fortunate." I smiled at that. I used to believe love was supposed to remain the same forever, but maybe it's supposed to grow, transform, even lose its way sometimes. He looked at me then, his gaze steady and full of quiet respect. "As long as you don't lose yourself in the process." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees around us. I could feel the chill in the air, the kind that hints at the season changing. "I'm grateful you visited that day," I said. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." He smiled again, this time with a hint of melancholy. "Sometimes people cross our path just to wake us up a little." When we said goodbye, it wasn't dramatic. No lingering touch, no promises. Just two people standing in the fading light, grateful for what had been shared, ready to move forward. As I drove home, the world outside my window felt clearer somehow. The trees seemed taller, the light sharper. I could almost feel a pulse returning to my life, steady and alive. That evening, Tom and I sat on the porch together. For the first time in a long while, we didn't discuss work or the day. We just sat there watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and pink. After a while, he reached for my hand. It felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once. "I've missed this," he said quietly. "So have I whispered. And in that simple moment, I realized that life doesn't always provide neat endings. Sometimes it gives you mirrors, people, moments, feelings that show you where you've been and what you still have left to rediscover. Mark had been that mirror, and because of him, I'd found my way back. Not just to Tom, but to myself. As the last of the light slipped below the horizon, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.